Then Rowling finally gets to Saturday. So she read that the Scottish government is proceeding with its controversial gender recognition plans, which will in effect mean that all a man needs to become a woman is to say he is one. I don't know what this law or this gender recognition plan is, but from what I've understood, it's the same kind of law that exists in a lot of other places where it has not been a problem. Anyway, Rowling writes that she was triggered by this, remembering a specific sexual assault, and I can absolutely sympathize. In a way. Again, sexual assault is terrible, and anything that reminds us of it is painful, and it's obviously a trigger. But in this case, she was triggered by something that wasn't actually threatening, and either way does not excuse doing what she did. And what she did was tweeting the things that I talked about in my previous video. Again, those tweets were transphobic. They were hurting trans people, many of whom have the same experience of sexual assault as Rowling does. Well, I don't know if they have the same experience, I don't know the details, but either way, many of whom have been similarly traumatized by sexual assault and things like that as Rowling had been. Again, this kind of trauma is real, it is horrible, but it does not excuse hurting other people. Next she writes, it would be so much easier to tweet the approved hashtags because of course trans rights are human rights and of course trans lives matter. Scoop up the woke cookies and bask in a virtue signaling afterglow. There is joy, relief and safety in conformity. As Simone de Beauvoir, I can't pronounce that, I'm sorry, also wrote, without a doubt it is more comfortable to endure blind bondage than to work for one's liberation. The dead too are better suited to the earth than the living. Well, I mean, I guess I'm glad that you're at least not fake apologizing to us. That's something. Huge numbers of women are justifiably terrified by trans activists. I know this because so many have got in touch with me to tell their stories. They're afraid of doxing, of losing their jobs or their livelihoods, and of violence. There is no excuse for anyone to make these kinds of threats, but I just want to say that these kinds of threats are things that trans people live with daily and that are being made worse by Rowling's tweets. But endlessly unpleasant as its constant targeting of me has been, I refuse to bow down to a movement that I believe is doing demonstrable harm in seeking to erode woman as a political and biological class and offering cover to predators like few before it. I stand alongside the brave women and men, gay, straight and trans, who are standing up for freedom of speech and thought and for the rights and safety of some of the most vulnerable in our society. Young gay kids, fragile teenagers and women who are reliant on and wish to retain their single-sex spaces. Polls show these women are in vast majority and exclude only those privileged or lucky enough never to have come up against male violence or sexual assault, and who have never troubled to educate themselves on how prevalent it is. Again, I have to repeat myself, trans rights do not erode women's rights. We are not saying that biological sex isn't real. We are not saying that women should not have all the rights and more that they already have and have fought for so long. Also earlier, Rowling herself admitted that trans people are among the most vulnerable groups, but here she is not including them in the people that she wants to protect. Like I've said before, trans people love freedom of speech. But we will speak up against anyone who uses their freedom of speech to spread hate and falsehoods that harms our community and us personally. I would also have loved to see these polls that she was referring to, because all the polls that I have seen point to most people, most women, being comfortable with trans people. So there's that. The one thing that gives me hope is that the women who can protest and organize are doing so, and they have some truly decent men and trans people alongside them. Ah yes, women, men and trans people. Those are the three genders. Political parties seeking to appease the loudest voices in this debate are ignoring women's concerns at their peril. In the UK, women are reaching out to each other across party lines, concerned about the erosion of their hard-won rights and widespread intimidation. None of the gender-critical women I've talked to hates trans people. On the contrary, many of them became interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for trans youth, and they're hugely sympathetic towards trans adults who simply want to live their lives, but who are facing a backlash for a brand of activism they don't endorse. The supreme irony is that the attempt to silence women with the word TERF may have pushed more young women towards radical feminism than the movement's seen in decades. Yes, they are sympathetic to trans adults who just want to live their lives and not fight for their own rights. There are trans people who are happy with the way society looks right now. There are trans people who are maybe not as happy, but just don't want to fight for whatever reason. But the vast majority of us do want to see change. Change that, once again, does not include robbing cis women of any of their rights. The last thing I want to say is this. I haven't written this essay in the hope that anybody will get out a violin for me, not even a teeny weeny one. I am extraordinarily fortunate. I'm a survivor, certainly not a victim. I've only mentioned my past because, like every other human being on this planet, I have a complex backstory which shapes my fears, my interests, and my opinions. I never forget that inner complexity when I'm creating a fictional character, and I certainly never forget it when it comes to trans people. All I'm asking, all I want, is for similar empathy, similar understanding to be extended to the many millions of people whose sole crime is wanting their concerns to be heard without receiving threats and abuse. Well, good, because I have no violin for you. I'm sorry you've gone through horrible things. I am glad you got out of the situation, but your complex backstory does not excuse the way that you are harming trans people like myself with your transphobia. And literally just here, when I was making the notes for this video, did I realize J.K. Rowling is actually Snape. Think about that for a moment. Now, the last thing that I want to say on this subject, and the last thing that I will say unless Rowling digs this pit any deeper, is that trans rights do not exclude women's rights. Luckily, there are a lot of reasonable people who realize that we can fight for both, and I can only hope that they and we can make a difference, can make a change, and prove that cis people and transgender people and everyone in between can live in peace and harmony and all have the basic human rights that we deserve. Thank you for listening to this lengthy rant. Be safe, be respectful. I'm gonna go drink some water now.